On the webcast and on Twitter using the hashtags Assembly Housing and Housing Associations. Can I remind members, guests and people in the audience to turn your phones off or put them onto silent? And can I ask if any apologies have been received?
Thank you, Chair. We've received apologies for absence from Assembly Member Boff.
Thank you very much. Item 2 on the agenda is declarations of interest. Can I ask members to note the list of officers in the report and ask if you have any additional interests to declare? No? Okay, thank you very much. Item 3 is the minutes of the last meeting. Can we agree those minutes? The meeting was held on the 4th of September.
Agreed.
Thank you very much. And item 4 is the summary list of actions. Can you note the completed and outstanding actions arising from previous meetings?
Noted.
Thank you very much. So that now brings us to our main item today on housing associations. What the committee has been doing for a while now is asking members of the public via our website, via Twitter, to suggest questions that we ask housing associations. One of the reasons we're calling them in today and why they've agreed to come, I think, is because the vast majority of the Mayor's funding for housing, for new housing, is going to housing associations rather than councils in the first tranches that have come forwards. And we want to ask them questions about what they're doing with that money. But we also have questions arising from our separate investigation into resident engagement, which we've tackled in much more detail during that investigation, but we will have some questions today. Other issues that have come up include things like repairs, things like transparency, and we'll have questions about that as well. But first of all, I want to show a reminder of why we're here. In the video that we are about to play, we visited a tenant of Hyde Housing in Peckham to look at the issues she'd had with her properties, and she has a question at the end of the video which we'll get to as part of our questions as well. So we had to play that.
So this is the bathroom, and this is my ceiling, basically almost 7-8 weeks from the time that it collapsed. So as you can see, I've got exposed beams. I can actually see my neighbour's bathroom floor, and I've got no electricity in this bathroom, and I'm still having to bath as it is at the moment, which is nowhere near ideal, and I don't feel very safe at all. So this is just a folder that I kind of keep of all the disrepair that's been going on in the property. And this is the bathroom, literally just before the issue with the ceiling, where I had mold and damp and actually fungus growing in the bathroom. And this was literally growing almost like on a weekly basis. I'd have to literally be scraping the fungus off the walls because obviously I can't be breathing that in, it's toxic. And then on top of that, part of the reason why I was in hospital as well is literally because I've actually got chronic tonsillitis because of the damp and the mold that happened previously. So it's bringing on all these additional health issues, which is not good. It was quite annoying because when I made that first phone call, the person, I did explain to the lady, this is going to happen, and I literally just felt I was so dismissed. There was no care, there was no empathy to what was actually going on, and I find that this is a recurring thing with Hyde, where I don't feel like they actually listen to some of the problems that the residents actually have. So what I'd like to ask the housing panel is how they're actually going to be looking after their existing housing stock, because a property is more than just providing a roof for somebody, it's more than just windows and doors, it's actually their interior as well as their exterior. So I would really just like to find out what they're actually doing in terms of looking after what is existing rather than the new, because we also need to remember their existing properties.
Okay. Thank you very much. That was Wazza, who is a resident of Hyde Housing, so none of you are directly responsible for her. So we'll come to her question shortly. I want to welcome our guests though. Who we have with us today are David Montague, who is the Chief Executive of L&Q. We have Geeta Nanda, who is the Chief Executive of Metropolitan Housing Association. Rod Cahill, who is the Chief Executive of Catalyst, and Helen Evans, who is the Chief Executive of Network Homes, and you're also the Vice Chair of the G15 group of housing associations. So yeah, thank you all for coming in. Thank you for coming in to be accountable for the work that you do on behalf of the GLA, which is going to be quite a lot. We've been looking at the numbers that have come out of the Mayor's housing funding announcements. We've been looking at the first £1.7 billion that was announced last year. And of that, about 91% of it went to housing associations, and a much smaller percentage to councils and other organisations. That the Mayor, I think, is trying to increase, but as it stands, that the vast majority of the GLA funding for new homes is going to people like you. So this is my first question, really. Can you tell us what you're doing with that money, please? We can start with Helen. How many new homes do you expect to deliver in the next 2 years, up to 2020? And can you also tell us what the tenure of those homes will be? And can you be quite clear whether or not those are net new homes, as opposed to ones that replace homes that are being demolished?
Okay, so our forward programme for the next 2 years contains around 1,200 handovers. I'm not going to go to 1,202 or something, but I can give you those figures if you would like them. 79% of that forward programme are for affordable tenures, which includes shared ownership, and that splits roughly half and half into affordable rent tenures and shared ownership, and then the remaining 20% would be private sale or other forms of commercial development for cross-subsidy purposes. The areas in which we're developing are North London, the outer London boroughs, some development in Lambeth, and we also have a programme in the northern home counties, which I don't suppose you're interested in, but which is another 600 or 700 homes. That is all net gain, bar 58 homes on the Stockwell Park regeneration, which is a straight replacement of social rent, demolished with social rent replacement. And in terms of bedroom sizes, they are predominantly 1, 2 and 3 bedrooms, so a third roughly, or 30% roughly, 1 beds, 2 beds and 3 beds, and then a small number of 4 beds, more represented in those replacement homes on Stockwell Park. And that's what we're doing with your money.
Okay, thank you very much. When you say affordable rent, can you tell us what proportion of that is at council levels of rent?
In the forward programme, because that's mayoral funded, it's either discounted or capped at a maximum of 65% of the market, or London affordable rent, which is broadly comparable to social rents.
And what proportion of those are London affordable rent then?
I can't give you that figure offhand.
Okay,
Sorry.
and you say that the Mayor's funding is capping you at 65% of market, not 80% of market.
So our 15-18 programme had different conditions on it than the forward programme, and that's the discounted capped element. 700 homes in the forward programme will all be at London affordable rent levels, or constrained by 106 requirements of local authorities, or other funding sources.
Okay, that's really useful. Is in terms of that, you said you're building some outside of London.
Yeah.
Are any of the London homes cross-subsidising ones outside of London?
Well,
what's the relationship between the two?
I mean, our programme is funded, corporately, so there isn't a sort of delineation in that way, but there are funding conditions on the Mayor's money that it is contained.
Yeah, so the Mayor's grants can't go outside of London. But if you're doing some for market rent, and then in London, they're going to be more valuable.
There might be some element of transference, but equally that's a question that I will get asked outside London. Are our new homes subsidising homes in London? Generally speaking, it's more expensive and difficult to develop in London, so the subsidy would be likely to flow the other way.
Okay, thank you very much. Rod, would you like to tell us what Catalyst is doing?
Yeah, over the period to 2021, we're committed to deliver just over 2,000 homes. Of which roughly 800 are for rent, 1,200 for shared ownership.
And within the rental homes, how many of those are at council levels of rent, and how many are at affordable rent?
There's a very small number of affordable rent. They're overwhelmingly London affordable rent or social rent.
Okay, that's useful to know. And about the size mix of those?
20% are 3-bed. They're all in the rented.
20% are 3 beds. That means 80% of them are 1 or 2 bed.
Yeah. 3-bed or more. 20% are 3-bed.
Okay. I'm sure some of my colleagues will have follow-up questions on that. And these are net new homes, you're not demolishing any homes?
Of those, roughly 400 are reprovision of existing.
400 out of 2,000?
Yes, yeah.
And you get full grant for those?
Well, when you say full grant...
It's the same grant whether or not you're replacing or building new?
Yeah.
Okay, I might have a follow-up question on that in a minute. Geeta, will you tell us what Metropolitan's doing with the grant you're receiving from the GLA?
Yes, we've got 680 affordable homes in London over the next 2 years, of which 450 of them are shared owners and the rest is rented, social rented. The majority of that is social rents, and we have 464 private homes as well that we'll take.
That's on top of the 480. So what proportion of your homes that you're building are within that overall affordable category?
Sorry, what?
Of the overall homes that you're building, including the market, what's the proportion that are in the affordable category?
It's about 70%.
And within that you've got, I'm trying to work this out, 680 in total that are affordable,
yes.
And 450 of those are shared ownership.
That's right.
Because that's the vast majority.
It is. Yeah.
Are shared ownership. And within the rental homes, what sort of rents are you charging? How many of those are council type levels of rent?
The majority of those are, I haven't got the exact figure, I'll have to work it out. I haven't got the exact figure, I'll have to work it out, but I can get that to you.
That would be really useful. I mean, it seems to me like if you multiply that down, the proportion of the homes that you're building that are what you would normally associate with housing associations, sort of council type levels of rent, is very small in terms of your new building.
Well, when you take a snapshot of 2 years, it's difficult to show what it is overall because, for example, we've got a large scale regeneration project going on in Clapham. You know, a large amount of rented homes have been already delivered, and that's what's happened. So you're looking at a programme going forward over a number of years. So, you know, if you were to take what we're doing in our plan over a number of years, it would be 80% of it would be affordable and, you know, over half of that would be rented. So it's just when you're taking the next 2 years, sometimes you're taking a snapshot which it doesn't kind of completely show the overall programme.
Okay, I'll come back to that in a minute in terms of the preference for shared ownership. David, will you take, because L&Q I think gets the most money out of any one organisation in this 1.7 billion that went out last year from the Mayor. What are you doing with it?
We've signed up to a strategic partnership which will deliver 15,000 affordable homes, 12,000 affordable homes, and a total of 20,000 homes altogether, so 60% affordable. And that breaks down into about 6,600 shared ownership, 640 London living rent, and the remainder are affordable rent. We, like our colleagues, our rents are based pretty much on what the Mayor's definition of London affordable rent is now. There's a small amount of old-fashioned affordable rent, but we always charged a genuinely affordable rent based on 35% of net incomes. Since we signed up to the original deal, 12,000 affordable out of a total of 20,000, we have agreed to an extension of a further 2,000 affordable, and we've also signed up to deliver in partnership with 9 black and minority ethnic associations a further 1,000 affordable homes. So that's a total of 15,000 affordable and 8,000 market, bringing a grand total of 20.
Did you say that was 1,000 extra homes with the BAME groups? And that's on top of the 2,000 that you agreed with the Mayor?
Yes, so originally 12,000 affordable, extension 2,000, plus 1,000 working in partnership with BME associations, so a total of 15,000. Okay,
so my maths is a bit rubbish. I'm in the middle of chairing a meeting. You said there's going to be 12,000 affordable homes in your original agreement. 6,600 of those
are shared ownership.
640 London living rent.
Yes, and 4,800 affordable rent.
4,800 London affordable rent. And
Is that over how many years?
and that would be from you. That would be none at the sort of pretend affordable up to 80%.
We never did
Yeah.
pretend affordable. We were given the ability to do pretend affordable, but we took the decision that we wanted our pretend affordable to be real affordable. And so we based our affordable rents on net incomes, and we go for 35% of net income.
Okay. So my next follow-up question, can I ask, what's the, for those of you that are focused quite a lot, I mean, you're all a majority focused on shared ownership here. What's the reason for that? And do you think it's a good tenure? Because there's a lot of questions being raised about shared ownership as something that potentially for the long term isn't going to work out for a lot of people. Why the focus on this in your new builds?
Shared ownership has two purposes for us. One is that it is part of our cross-subsidy arrangements for the development of schemes. And all of these questions will ultimately come down to how the builds are financed. So we build shared ownership as part of our cross-subsidy arrangements, but we also build it because it is meeting a significant need for people who cannot access their housing needs on the private market anymore. Perhaps people who, traditionally would have been able to buy privately are now buying into shared ownership because that is a way of meeting their housing needs. And, actually, so it's achieving two things for us. It's cross-subsidising our rental homes and it's meeting a need.
So that,
Yeah.
Sorry, Tom.
Again, just on the proportions and just going back to what Helen was saying about, Geeta was saying about snapshots, because if you look at one particular programme, that doesn't reflect what we're doing overall. So in our case, for example, overall, we're building across our programmes 40% rent, 35% shared ownership, 25% market sale. That's the balance of the programme. We have been doing shared ownership for over 30 years. It has always been a terrific solution for people who earn more than those who tend to qualify for social rent, but earn less than those who can get housing in terms of market rent or market sale. So it's always been an incredibly popular, good product meeting real housing need. I think it's become more and more difficult, particularly towards inner London because of values, but it's still a great part of what we provide in terms of meeting the needs of, as we seek to do, of people across the income range.
So just building on that, again, ours is 40-40-20, 40% rent, 40% shared ownership and 20% market sale. That's our kind of overall programme.
Sorry, could you speak up? Yeah, we can't hear you.
Oh, sorry, can't hear me. Okay, I'll talk louder, sorry.
If you go nearer the microphone, that might help as well.
Okay, so I'm saying that 40-40-20 is our split in terms of rent, shared ownership and in terms of market products. Again, we've been doing shared ownership for a very long period of time. We have found that there has been a shift in London in terms of who's accessing shared ownership because the market has changed quite substantially. And therefore, there's a lot more people who previously would have probably accessed the market who outright sale who are coming into shared ownership, and so it's a sort of vital. Even as we're seeing the market change, which it is at the moment, there's quite big shifts in terms of what's happening in terms of the market, in terms of market sale. Shared ownership is incredibly popular. We're seeing, huge amounts of people that are owning shared ownership. In terms of whether I think it's a good proposition, because I think that was one of your questions, we have a large number of people who do staircase, who do actually reach full ownership.
Do you know the proportion?
Yeah, so I think last year we had 500 that went roughly to full ownership. And we also have a large number of people who do sort of staircase up as well, so by other proportions, and that changes depending on the market. We're at the point of merging with another association, Thames Valley Housing, and They offer a kind of ability for people to buy smaller proportions, so it's not so expensive or difficult for them to be able to buy extra shares. So, you know, leasehold is a difficult tenure, and shared ownership can, you know, people can find some more complexity in that, but in terms of accessing the market, and then people, we're seeing quite a lot of people, because we've been around a long time, moving from the sort of one bed into 3 bed, shared ownership and being able to stay in local areas. That's what we've found as well, even though not necessarily everyone, but, you know, it does allow people to stay in a local community and area at times.
If I could just add, hopefully, just something that colleagues haven't said before. We have 9,000 shared ownership homes amongst our total stock holding, and 90% of those 9,000 homes, the buyers purchased 40% or less, and so it's a relatively low amount that they purchased first time around. Almost 70% of our shared owners come from the private rented sector, and so they are moving into a place which is more affordable, which is better quality, and which offers greater security. Another 27% were previously living with family and friends, and so it's a way into housing for people who would otherwise be denied. Just to give you a contrast between those people that are moving into shared ownership and our social housing tenants, if you are an L&Q shared owner, you will typically have an income of around £45,000 a year. Whereas if you are an L&Q social rented tenant, the median income of our social renters is £13,500. Upper quartile, 17,000. London living wage, 20,000. So 2 very different groups, both of whom need somewhere to live.
Tom, did you have a follow-up question?
Yeah, I mean, because, you know, I do sometimes take a look at shared ownership properties, and, you know, the further you go into central, you know, just to sort of see what's going on, and the further you go into central, you know, you're talking some ridiculous values. And really, you know, even if you're purchasing just 25%, you need to, you know, find quite an extraordinary amount of money. I'm just wondering whether or not London living rent, particularly in more inner London boroughs, is a better way to go than shared ownership.
We've done a London living rent scheme. We've only done one so far, and it was in an outer London borough, but the demand was absolutely overwhelming. For the 21 homes that we had available, we had literally hundreds of applicants, and that's because people are able to access those homes without a deposit. So as a product, it is a wider pool of people than those who may, for example, have access to the bank of mum and dad or other ways of raising a deposit. Yeah.
Any other comments on that?
We launched our first London living rent scheme just a few months ago. 88 homes in Royal Wharf, 3-bedroom flat on the market would attract a rent of £3,000 a month, and we're charging £1,000 a month. So, as Helen said, it's very attractive. We had over 800 applicants for those 88 homes. It's massively popular, and it has a really big role to play in London.
Our focus is primarily on the outside of London, is West London. So we're still finding that shared ownership
Works for you.
It works for us. So.
Yeah, I think the very expensive areas, it's a difficult thing, and rent is, especially at those levels, is a good product. So it works in certain areas, and we're all very good at sort of plotting and seeing exactly where it works, but we also have to think about the communities in which we work in and what's right for those communities as well.
Can I ask another? I've got another follow-up, not on this topic.
Well, go on. No.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
It's just I wanted to
I've got a final question. Let me do my final question.
Okay,
my final question is: we've been looking at the need across London, the strategic housing market assessment, the SMART. It's really clear that 2/3 of the homes across London need to be affordable, and of those affordable homes, the need across London is for 2/3 of them to be at social levels of rent. So, what is the Mayor pressing you? I know that some of the money that was given and allocated last year was tenure to be decided. Is the Mayor pressing you to make more of that social levels of rent? and what needs to change for you to build more social homes with this grant money?
I think it's important to understand the economics of social rent.
We understand that it's the only affordable tenure for a lot of people in London.
The economics of producing and funding it. So, I mean, basically, to produce a social rent unit in London is going to cost a minimum of 300,000, nearer 400,000 if it's a larger unit. The rent the rent in terms of what it can fund of that amount is somewhere between 80 and 100,000 pounds. So every social rent unit is generating a deficit of somewhere between 200,000 and 300,000.
What's your period of assessment there?
Over 30 years.
30 years.
Yeah, is generating a deficit of 200,000 to 300,000 pounds. Now the funding available, it's currently 70,000, going up to 80,000. So you can see that every time we do that, we are having to find enormous amounts of money to cross-subsidise. Happy to do it, and we are doing it, but it means you can't do very many of them. And that's another reason why shared ownership is in there as part of the programme, because shared ownership actually produces a positive return, so you can do more of them. So I think there's massive, I entirely agree with the analysis in terms of where the need is and what's really needed, but there needs to be an understanding of what needs to happen to fund a significant programme of social rent. We're prepared to put our cross-subsidy in, but the amount of grant available at 70 or 80,000 is simply not credible in terms of a large programme of social rent.
Thank you, that's a useful answer. Would the rest of you agree with that as the answer,
Yeah.
that bigger grants are needed?
It needs to at least double to be meaningful in terms of producing a big programme of social rent. And I think local authorities who are starting to do their own or doing their own development, they are now understanding that because they're faced with the same economics themselves in terms of they want to produce the social rent, but they can now see what the financial implication of that is, just given the sheer production costs in the capital.
We had a very interesting meeting talking to councils setting up their own companies about these exact issues. Tom, just finish up this.
Yeah, I was interested, essentially because you're funding homes out of, you've got the grant and then you've got the homes that you're funding out of your own resources. And I was wondering, of the homes that you're talking about, how many would be delivered just using your own resources rather than grant? And is the sum of the two greater than an individual? Is it greater than if you just separated them out and looked at how much you could deliver individually? Are you delivering more with the combination of the two?
I guess organisations account for these things differently, but in our circumstances we will apply our internal subsidy from wherever it's generated across the programme of homes that we're developing. So there aren't, these are the homes that are grant aided and these are the homes that we're doing it purely out of our own resources. We'll take our own resources and layer them on top of what else is going into that development, be it grant or cross-subsidy from sales or whatever it is.
I think also that there is this recycled capital grant through shared ownership, which is released and then recycled. So it's very efficient. It kind of keeps getting recycled in that way. So there's, different organisations will have different amounts of that grant and how that can be applied.
When the shared ownership is recycled, does that go straight to you or does it go back to the mayor to be reallocated? So when someone staircases
you have to
out,
use it within a period.
Yes.
Use it or lose it.
Use it or lose it.
Yeah.
What's the period?
3 years.
3 years. Like same for local authorities. Yeah.
From an own perspective, I said earlier that we've got a 20,000 home programme in London, of which 12,000 is affordable. The 8,000 that we build for sale, that's how much it takes in order to deliver the 12,000 with current grant rates. So we have to mount a pretty significant sales operation in order to make a profit, in order to fund the gap on the affordable.
So are all those 8,000 for sale or only for PRS, for market rent?
Sale.
They're all for sale.
Yeah. Sorry, no, it's I beg your pardon. It's about half and half prime and half RSL.
So 4 and 4.
Yeah.
Sorry, you said 12,000, but just
it's 12,000 affordable.
But just earlier you were
8,000.
saying you had 15,000.
The original deal was 12,000
Oh, now it's...
plus 8,000.
And now what's the deal?
It's now, we've signed up to another 2,000
And the other one?
and another 1,000 with BME partners.
Does that mean more, you have to add on more for sale or PRS?
Probably, yes, but we haven't made that decision yet.
I think one of the things that we do as well is from our market sale, we have a sort of pot. So we apply things across the board, as Helen said, but we also have a pot. So if we have a particular area we want to do rent and we want to keep the rents low, we may take our own sort of subsidy pot on top of the subsidy pot that we've already got, just to make sure we're keeping the rents low. So we use our sort of the profits that we make from our market activities to try and apply it as generously in terms of our affordable housing. And we use those stats all the time, Sean, that you came across around the need for more social rented homes, because it's something we totally believe in.
Just on the need point, actually, the analysis we've done is that actually social rent itself is too high for many households. So it's, even when we're letting it social rent, that's very often a stretch for the people who are on particularly low incomes. So it's so social. In our view, it's kind of a maximum for one should be charging ideally for households below a certain income.
Is that can I come in?
Yes, Nikki.
Is that because they're the tenants you're talking about who can't afford it are on some kind of... Could you remove that phone, please? They're on some kind of benefit cap.
Sorry, I got distracted.
Yeah, I bet you did. Yeah, sorry. Is it because they're...
People can be caught by the benefit cap.
Yeah.
Even on social rents, yes, they can.
Unless
they can be caught by the benefit cap on social rents.
So the benefit cap catch... Sorry.
I'm
Just want that phone taken.
The benefit cap can impact on what might be described as London affordable or social rents in some circumstances in higher value areas, unless you have a rent system like David's where you're attributing it to income. It's more likely, actually, in our experience, it's more likely outside London than inside London.
Yes. I mean, I've just been looking at the figures. It's interesting, there aren't that many households caught by the benefit cap. But there are a lot more, I've been told, I don't know if it's true, that housing benefit actually is more of a reason for people not being able to afford social rents. Can that be true?
You say housing benefit.
I'm not sure in what circumstances, I think.
No?
Perhaps we'd have to understand the circumstances you're describing. I mean, housing benefit will be capped at the local housing allowance.
And that can be a problem? Not in your experience?
Well, we would never set a rent that was higher than local housing allowance. So
it tends to be more of an issue outside London.
Yeah.
It's not an issue in London.
It's an issue outside London.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I heard that in the national context. So
Yeah.
Can I just ask you, Rod, about size mix of your homes? Just across the board, and this is the affordable, of course, including shared ownership and so on. How many of them are family homes?
Well, are you defining family as
3-bed plus.
3-bed plus is about 20% of what we do, and overwhelmingly in the rented part of what we do. So the sales of shared ownership is heavily weighted towards 1 and 2 bedroom properties.
Right.
And to be honest, that's simply a function of value and affordability, particularly in London. I mean, outside London, the mix on shared ownership and sale is different. There tend to be more houses, and there tend to be more sort of 3-bedroom properties. But trying to make shared ownership work, for example, in London, even in the outer boroughs, on 3 beds is very, very difficult.
Very difficult for 3-bed. And in social rented, is it mainly 1 and 2 bed, or is it mainly 3-bed?
Oh, if you take... Well, the 3 beds are all in the rented. They're pretty much all in the rented. So that's roughly, by the sound of it, something like 40 to 50% of the rented would be 3-bed or more.
Okay.
But again, if we go back to what I was talking about, the economics. To produce a 3-bedroom home, rented home in London, is going to cost somewhere between 350 and 400,000 pounds. And when your rent, social rent, is 140 quid a week or thereabouts for that unit, that can only finance something like 80 to 100,000 pounds. So you've got a massive subsidy requirement, which we meet through cross-subsidy from sale and through the profits from previous years, and through what is quite a small contribution in terms of grant at 70 or 80,000.
Rod, can I ask you, just to interrupt, would it be easier for you if you had, I mean, you're not on a, you haven't got a variable grant, have you? So you get the same grant whether you build 1 bed, 2 bed, 3 bed, 4 bed.
Well, I mean, obviously it should be sensitive to the size of the home, but in very crude terms, it just isn't enough. It doesn't matter which size you look at. We would ideally like to be building a lot more social rent, London affordable rent homes as part of what we do, and we put a lot of subsidy into those new homes. But if the GLA, if the government want us to do more of those, and we're really pleased that seems to be now a consensus that we need some more of those, then there's got to be some realism about the amount of subsidy to go into them, because 70 or 80,000 simply is not realistic.
But that's what you get. You get 70, 80,000, whether it's 1 bed, 2 bed, 3
exactly.
bed, 4 bed.
It's
now, I want to ask you, point blank, if you had variable, if you were able to vary that, would that mean you build more family housing?
Yes, if the quantum was at least doubled. So if we were getting, let's say, 120,000 for a 1 bed and 200,000 for a 3 bed, then yes, absolutely.
Well, you're sidestepping my question really, because it's, well, yes, okay.
Yes.
But in an ideal world, in the world we want.
You're not allowed to just put 2 grants into one home. You can't just go, I'll build a 2 bed with two grants.
Is the getting the money for the. Yeah.
I mean, I think,
but
I do think it is the big funding decision that we all have to make as taxpayers, as local authorities, as housing. If we want, and there seems to be this consensus now that we should be building a lot more homes which are genuinely affordable at social rent or London affordable rent levels. We can do that. We have the ability to do that, but we have to be met halfway in terms of funding.
Nikki, can I possibly? We're way over time already, and I need to move on to Tony and then another question.
Okay, can I just ask Helen the same question? Because I just want to know, David, would it be easier for you if you had variable grant rate to build more? I know a lot of your homes are 1 and 2 bed. Would it make it easier for you to build 3 bed if you could choose? I mean, at the moment, you get the same grant for a 3 bed as for a 1 bed.
Of course, if we had more grant for bigger homes, it would make the building of bigger homes easier.
Say you had the same grant that you've got now. You've got the same. Would it be easier for you to build family housing?
If we had the same...
You've got the same grant, but you're only allowed to use a set amount for each... Sorry, you have the same grant whether it's 1, 2 or 3 bed at the moment, or 4 bed or 5 bed.
Correct.
Okay, that seems to me a disincentive to build family housing.
Well, we will build what we agree with the mayor, with the local authority, and if we agree we need more family housing, then we will say, and this is the amount of grant that is required, or this is the amount of affordable we can build with that amount of grant. And so we can adapt the grant regime, but it comes back to Rod's point. If there isn't enough grant, we simply won't build enough homes.
You'd be building
I think
fewer
that there is a bigger issue. It's not about the amount of grant that attaches to each home. It is about the amount of grant overall that goes into the system.
Can I draw a line onto that now?
I'm fine.
Thank you. And can I go to Tony, who has a question?
Just get clarity off Rod when he talks about the 350 to 400k. Is that an average unit build cost?
No, that's total production cost. So it's land, it's building, it's the whole shooting match. In terms of
land's yours, isn't it? Basically, land's yours. So you're putting land in at a value, aren't you?
No, we're acquiring.
You're always. It's not your land ever.
In some cases where we're regenerating existing estates, then but it still has a value because we will have a book value for it.
Sure.
And then usually in that situation, there's a lot of collateral costs that you've got if you are regenerating an existing estate.
Sure.
In terms of moving tenants, home loss payments, disturbance, all the rest of it.
So what's your average unit build cost then?
I can tell you in sort of per metre squared if that helps. Or what?
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Well, a flatted development right now is about depending on complexity, is somewhere between £2,500 and £3,000 a square metre.
Okay, and all the numbers everybody's given in terms of delivery so far, are you all confident in the current market, without going on about lobbying the government for more money in the world of the perfect world the chairman hopes we one day have, are you confident you actually will meet the numbers that you projected by 2021? We start there.
I think I'm confident on the numbers to 2021. The element of cross-subsidy that we need is largely being provided by shared ownership homes, and in outer London boroughs and in areas where the sale market is holding up reasonably well. Clearly, from everything you've heard, if the sales market becomes extremely difficult post-2021 or whenever, then we have to make decisions about curtailing or reducing our overall rate of development, because we can't take the strain in terms of our obligations to banks in relation to covenants of being unable to provide that cross-subsidy. So if we can't sell homes, whether it's shared ownership or private sale, then ultimately we have to reduce the number of homes that we build.
In our strategic partner, we signed up to 2,000 homes by 2021 in terms of starts. We'll do that.
Yeah, everything I've quoted is due to be completed, so those numbers are certain.
Same, we'll deliver.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So I just want to move on to another set of questions about your overall operation. So we're going to focus there on what you're building new, but obviously you all own considerable numbers of homes in London, many of which come via charities and foundations, and they've been around for a very long time. So can I ask you all to say whether or not you're a charity, and what's your core market in terms of what you're providing? How many of the homes that you currently look after are still the social homes that your founders envisaged? And are you sticking to that core purpose that your founders had, given what you're developing now?
Start? Well, we are significantly smaller than some of our colleagues along the table here, but we are a charity. The vast majority of our homes are still what we describe as general rented, which would be social or subsidised rented homes. I think about 25% are now shared owners or leaseholders, split about half and half. Our board is absolutely still committed to its social purpose. It has taken what you might describe as a wide view of needs, so we believe that providing shared ownership homes, or indeed London Living Rent homes, is discharging our charitable obligation. Clearly building homes for private sale isn't, but we're using the investment from that to build rented homes. We have a strongly geographical strategy, so we work with local authorities to assist them in discharging their duty to homeless households. We see that as being part of our core purpose. We are investing heavily in our existing stock in order to ensure that it is as good as our new stock, and that's based on very detailed information about what condition it's in and what its needs are and so on. And we offer a wide range of other support where we need to residents in our rented homes. We started life as Brent People's Housing Association in the aftermath of Cathy Come Home, and our whole history has been orientated around meeting the needs of the people in the communities in which we're working. And I think our board is absolutely solid on that.
Yeah, similar story. So we've got 20,000 homes, 14,000 roughly rent, 6,000 shared ownership. All of those, from our point of view, discharge our charitable purpose. That's what we're here to do. We are a charity. Again, across different income levels, but all people who are in housing need. We invest again massively in our existing stock, both in terms of not just repairs and cyclical works and major repairs, but also in terms of reinvestment, redevelopment of existing stock where we don't feel it's adequate, re-provision of existing social rented accommodation. We're very clear about why we're doing market sale. It's there for two reasons, primarily to help us deliver the affordable or charitable housing. That's our prime purpose. We actually do think it has an additional benefit, which is that it helps create mixed income areas, which we believe are really healthy and good, and actually are what London's all about, I've always felt. Like Network, we also we invest over 2 million a year through what we call Cactus Gateway, which is all about community investment. It's about support for our residents, for the estates, particularly now focused on helping our residents to cope with the effect of welfare reform. So absolutely, I mean, I think I joined the organisation 35 years ago, and I feel it is, in terms of its heartbeat, it's exactly where it was 35 years ago in terms of absolute commitment to social purpose. It's why people come and work for us, to make a difference. So yeah, I think, and actually I just feel we're better able to do it now. We've got more resources, we've got more capability, and we're doing more, and we're doing it better.
Are you a charity, did you say
Yeah.
that? Okay, great. Geeta?
Yes, we're a charity as well, and around 25% of our homes is shared ownership. We also, I suppose, the other thing to add from what others have said is that we have 6,000 care and support homes. We focus on, within that, older people, people with learning disabilities and mental health support, as well as in our homes as well. We also provide services to others who don't live in our homes, so we provide to a range, a number of people than just our own residents, and in terms of accommodation-based services. We absolutely have social housing at the heart of what we do, but we also provide for those people who are not able to access the market, the private market, and shared ownership does that, and it does it well. We got over 1,000 people into work last year, so and you know we're on to do about 1,200, 1,300 this year. So we get investment in. We got £500,000 from JP Morgan, which was fantastic, to help us with our working with other associations, some around the table here, to get people into work. So we try and bring investment in, as well as give monies to other charities and other organisations to help us with those sort of primary causes. So we are very much focused on those sort of local areas and communities and what we can do.
Thank you.
L&Q is a charity, born in the Cathy Come Home era, in a similar way to many of our colleagues, and feel just as passionate about our core charitable purpose today as we did back in 1963. We own and manage 90,000 homes, of which 60,000 are social rent, 7,000 care and support, and 9,000 shared ownership. So the vast majority of our stock meets a social purpose. This year we will invest £200 million into the maintenance of that stock. We've just introduced a new home standard to ensure that our existing homes are at least as good quality as our new homes. We're putting £50 million into stripping cladding and fire safety measures. We have just converted 8,500 fixed-term tenancies to lifetime tenancies. £250 million into a charitable foundation to invest in communities, £5 million a year into an L&Q Academy for apprenticeships and a graduate programme targeted at residents. So very much a charity and absolutely committed to our social purpose.
Okay, thank you. I have some questions about maintenance and rent levels. I'll try and combine them all into one big question to save some time, if that's okay. One thing we've seen is a rent freeze from the government, and I wanted to ask, first of all, whether you've made that up through service charges, because those are some issues that have come through in our feedback from residents, that the perception that service charges have shot up when rents have not. And then the big question that comes from our video, which is essentially, of your existing homes, don't the rents cover decent maintenance? And is there a problem with getting enough maintenance done? You've all said you spend a lot of money on maintenance of your existing homes. And yet I have to say, of all the feedback we've had, a lot of it has been about repairs, maintenance, problems with that, and the condition of existing homes. So is there a crisis of rent levels, what you can spend on maintenance, and are you able to keep your existing homes in decent shape? Because it seems like there are problems, I have to say.
Shall I start with the rents? We were subject to a rent reduction, rent reduction. We have not passed that on through increases in service charges, because there's an entirely different regime for rents and service charges, and actually it wouldn't be permissible in contractual and legal terms to just make it up through service charges. Service charges, variable service charges, are based on the actual costs that we are incurring, with a management cost. Now, actual costs can go up. And I think, certainly some colleagues along the table and I have had a lot of discussion about service charges. It is a significant issue, particularly in complex buildings, because it goes to the affordability of those flats for the people who live in them. I don't necessarily think we've always got the service charge element of what we're doing right, but it's not cross-subsidising the rent. It's, it's other issues around service charges. For example, were they correctly estimated at the time that people went in? Have estimates been done which have been proven to be conservative or inaccurate? And then, after the first 2 years of occupation, there's quite a sharp increase, and that creates difficulty in terms of affordability. All of those are things that do happen, not pretending that they don't happen, but it really isn't the case that we covered the rent reduction by putting up the service charges.
In terms of, we're spending 40 million a year on both day-to-day and major repairs. That goes into our budgets first before we start talking about what we're going to spend on in terms of investing in new homes. We're carrying out thousands of repairs during the course of a year. I don't know. I suspect there's another point of view in terms of that particular case, in terms of Hyde. Do we always get it right? No. I get regular emails from tenants who complain about repairs not being carried out on time or whatever.
There's been no cutbacks in your budgets for repairs. What I've seen a few times is residents are adding up the amount of rent and service charge they've paid towards their building, and then looking at the building going, can that possibly have been spent on my building? There's enough money in the pot to cover decent amounts of repairs. Yeah. There's no crisis there.
Yeah, and where we also look at strategically across our stock to identify, we have a rating system in terms of the quality of our stock, A, B, C, and C properties are ones that we don't think are up to the standard that we think is right, and so we focus on those. So last night, for example, my board approved investment of getting on for 400 million in one of our estates, which we don't think is where the standards aren't satisfactory, and we agree with our residents that we should redevelop it. And so the focus on new homes isn't just about going out and buying sites. It's also about looking at our existing stock, our existing estates, and seeing where we can improve the quality for existing residents.
Yeah, we have increased our expenditure on repairs over the last year and into our plan going forward because we weren't spending enough. I think there is something that needs to be discussed a bit more, which is really around the quality of some of the the contracting industry. We talk a lot about that in terms of new homes and having the right contractors, but actually there's a crisis also in terms of companies that can do, for example, fire risk actions following what's happened with Grenfell, and getting things done to the right standard and quality quickly enough. We've brought our repairs contracting in for part of our organisation, not the whole part of it. And you can see very directly what's happening in terms of the lack of electricians, the support and training that needs to go in to get right people into the industry, and the culture and values changes that are needed in order to do that. This isn't a quick fix. So sometimes it's because when things go wrong, it's because we haven't actioned it properly, and sometimes it's because we're relying on other people who don't do what they say, and we have to then pick it up and we go round in a loop. I think we acknowledge that, and we're putting in place as many improvements as we can to get that better by working and listening with our residents, and with getting our contracts right, and bringing things in-house and trying to therefore improve the quality of what we're doing. We, for example, at Metropolitan brought in our sort of responsive day-to-day contractor in-house. It's worked brilliantly in the Midlands because you can recruit people and they stay, and they feel totally part of the organisation. Satisfaction's very, very high. In London, it's a different story, and it's much, much harder to recruit the right people, and it's something we're continuously battling with, and are determined to get right. But it's not a quick fix. One contractor is brilliant and then they're terrible, and another one then is brilliant and they're then terrible, and we're always juggling this across our stock. So I think we should all talk more around the crisis in contracting more generally.
Okay, I'm a local councillor and I have experience of this. Did you put that down to subcontracting, or just changing character of contractors?
I think we try and work in partnership with the contractors and make it as seamless a service as possible. There's so many different handoffs, and there's so many people are competing with each other for labour, and in the same way we've seen on construction sites, Eastern European people who were working on there after Christmas not coming back. We're seeing similar crises in terms of plumbing, electricians. And we're doing the apprenticeship programs, we're bringing them in, and we're beginning to turn that, but it's not an easy thing to turn.
Okay, we're not supposed to be talking about Brexit today, so that's just...
That will obviously help. That will obviously help, though, I should think.
It's on the agenda, right?
Oh, is it? Okay, I'm sorry. We'll talk about that later. David, so we keep coming to you last, and we'll come to you first next time.
No problem. I hope it's an easy question. Your question started with the impact of the imposed rent reductions. For L&Q, that took £75 million out of our income every year. For the sector, it was £1.3 billion. So these are really big numbers, and I think it did cause the sector to step back and reflect on how we could maintain our service in the face of these massive reductions in our income. I can't say how others responded, but in our case, we had to take another look at our void standard, and during those years we couldn't decorate every room as we might have done before. We couldn't fit the kitchen in the same way that we might have done before, and therefore we would have to repair the existing kitchen when it was probably beyond its useful life. We had to look again at the contract between the resident, the tenant, and L&Q, and on many occasions, because we are a charity, we offered more than the contract but because our rents were being reduced, we had to get closer to the contract. And I think it also caused us to delay some of those difficult decisions when it came to investment in our more challenging stock, our more challenging estates as well. So it did have, I think, an impact upon the quality of our service, as much as we tried to maintain the same service levels. And our response was, let's do what we can well, but it won't be as much as we could do before. We did some good things, and so in a similar way to Geeta and colleagues, we brought our maintenance service in-house, and I totally agree with what Geeta said. It's a merry-go-round. You'll select a maintenance contractor, they'll be great for a while, and then they'll chase the next contract and you'll notice a dip in service levels. You'll challenge them, it'll improve for a while, and then it'll get worse, and so you'll get another contractor and go. It's just the same merry-go-round, you're just stuck on it. And so we bought our service in-house. We cheaply transferred people from maintenance contractors. They're delivering a better service at a lower cost, and they are far happier because they're working for a company that cares, that can offer them a career. Last year we delivered 200,000 maintenance fixes, 94% on time, 86% satisfaction, but we get it wrong, and when we get it wrong sometimes we get it badly wrong, and we must do better. For that reason we've just employed somebody, the person from Argos, who delivered their online service, who connected that to their guaranteed same-day delivery service. And you can see how this kind of stuff could really help our maintenance service. If all of our residents could access our service online and were guaranteed a same-day fix, that could revolutionise the service. So I think there is a lot we can learn from other industries. We're investing £150 million over the next 4 years into technology to transform our service.
That's really interesting. Thank you. We're trying to whip through these questions, but that's very, very interesting indeed. Tony, you have a question, and then I'll come to you, Tom, for the follow-up. Yeah.
A little disappointed that you are, again, blaming others rather than always taking responsibility. David at the end cheered me up a little bit. I mean, have you actually thought of actually having all the London G15 economies of scale and actually doing one maintenance contract? Because you talked about 200,000 fixes, but I'm sure you're well aware that's not a lot compared to some of the larger FM contracts available in the private sector. So have you ever looked at doing a one London maintenance contract for all the G15 to try and get those economies of scale? Therefore you'll have more money to invest in your staff, and rather than just insourcing it on an individual basis.
I believe we have considered that as a group, and I'm not sure that my immediate reaction is that it would necessarily improve the standard of service that's being provided, because our experience is that the small and medium-sized contractors who work for us, and we don't have an in-house service, but we have a range of providers, tend to be significantly better than the very large providers. And indeed some of the more well-known failures in the sector have been as a result of very large contract procurements, which then are unable to respond to local needs and differing requirements of different organisations. So the short answer is no. We collaborate about a lot of things, but I have never heard us consider going out for a macro repairs contract, and I doubt that we will.
I wouldn't consider it just for ourselves, let alone. I think it's a strategic mistake to go for a single contract, because you have all your eggs in one basket, and there's been quite one noticeable massive failure in the sector on the basis of selecting one contractor. A lot of stock.
What I was hoping that you do is come up with an innovation solution. I'm not suggesting it was the one I was proposing. I just feel there's no kind of how are we going. The question is, the lady on the film was saying there's a huge hole in her ceiling, and it hasn't been fixed in however many weeks it was. And none of you are really coming up with a kind of, I know it's not one of your housing associations, you're not come up with any reason you're going to have a real step change in the quality of customer service for your tenants in terms of the backlog maintenance or maintenance of your buildings.
I think we don't have it. Well, I think, I'm sorry if I gave you the impression that I wasn't accepting responsibility, because I take complete responsibility for our service. When our service fails, it is my responsibility. I'm just trying to give you an honest reflection of the challenges that we face. But I think we are being innovative. The fact that we bought the guy in from Argos, we're investing £150 million into technological transformation. We're putting another £200 million into the quality of the service. We're putting £5 million a year into apprenticeships, I think you will see a transformation of the maintenance service, not just in L&Q but across the sector over the coming years.
And I think in terms of, new ideas, we're trying to think of different ideas and, is there a platform by which, or, looking at technology, whereby people can use it to choose their own contractor and do that. And there's, there's some examples and pilots going on around that, which means you can access that local contract, you can feel in control of it, but there's a platform that allows you to do that. And it's, it's something we're looking at and experimenting with, but we do have to find something different, whether that's bring it in-house, do it yourself and understand the problems much better rather than
yourself, then you're not doing it as the G15, you're doing your own thing.
But the thing is that unless you're really confident you could do it for your own residents, you wouldn't even try and offer it to others. I mean, we've all got to get better at it. And there is merit in having a range of contractors and those smaller local ones, because that's what also keeps the economy in the community going as well. It's not, you don't want to have these big gigantic things that then can go wrong. You want to make sure that person who knows your residents in that local area has keeps working.
We've thought about it. We've got a massive service centre in Sidcup, 500 people. We've got a fleet of vans all over London, and we often ask ourselves if there is a service we could offer others. But I think Geeta's right. We've got to fix our own service for our own residents before we even think about offering to somebody else.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Tom has a question.
I do, yes.
And then I want to ask something about fire safety, which one of you brought up already.
First of all, it seems in-house is the way forward. I know 2 London boroughs that are considering setting up their own essentially building companies to bring lots of services in-house. But I had a question. I'm afraid I'm going to put Helen on the spot, because one of my colleagues, Flo Ashalomi, who was hoping to be here despite the fact she's not on the committee but she can't make it, is one of your residents.
I know.
And I've got a question. I know she's been in touch with you. And she's got a question which I think kind of encapsulates this sort of balance between existing tenants and new build, because I know that you're doing some work on her estate. I think it's the Stockwell Park estate, adding an extra storey on top of her property, her block, sorry. And all sorts of difficulties with contractors, as we discussed. And I think the sort of question is, do you think that in trying to deliver more housing on a very complex and tight site, you're not providing an adequate service to existing tenants, and therefore there should be more transparency with regards to complaints procedures with chosen contractors?
I mean, I'm very familiar with the incident that happened at this building last weekend, where there was water ingress through a temporary roof. Mm-hmm. We are putting 13 flats on top of an existing building. It was considered an innovative idea, which increased the housing stock in the area. Whether I would ever consider doing something similar again in the same circumstances is probably a different question. When the matter was drawn to, when the event occurred, I think that the response was relatively good. It was immediate, it was a weekend, there were people out there, they relocated the household most seriously affected and put rectification in place and so on. But we have taken every point in the communication from your colleague and actioned it. It was the following day. So, on the basis that yes, it shouldn't have happened and there shouldn't have been a significant leak into the top floor flat, once it had occurred, it certainly wasn't an 8 weeks and nobody's responded. It was an immediate response, and I think it was a reasonably adequate response. In terms of the complaints about the contractor, this is a major contractor working on Stockwell Park. Stockwell is a whole estate regeneration now coming towards the end, and this contractor are building a significant block of flats as well as doing this rooftop extension. And we do have daily liaison with them, and in the instance of this event, they reacted really quite promptly to rectify what the problems were. Some of the issues that were subsequently raised about leaving doors open or not tidying up after themselves, we have raised with them. But in the same way as with routine maintenance, this kind of thing requires absolutely constant management a contractor will respond to a event in a prompt and effective way, unless you keep on them, to be honest, you run the risk that it will reoccur. And so we try and have intensive contract management in these kind of circumstances.
Would you find that easier to think if you're bringing things in-house, like some of your colleagues have said?
I don't think that an organisation of the size of Network could ever bring the kind of competencies in-house that could put an additional floor on an existing building.
I see. So you need to be a larger organisation.
Maybe if you're L&Q, but we are buying in from competent contractors. We're buying in very often from household names. The question of the extent to which we ought to be able to rely on them to do what they need to do is something that I'm sure we will come to later when we talk about new build, and fire safety. But for an organisation of our size, you couldn't build blocks of flats of these kinds with in-house resources. We're not big enough.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so in terms of our meeting, we've got 45 minutes left, and towards the end of the meeting, we want to ask you what more we can do to help you. So to give you an incentive to get to that question, let's try and speed it up a little bit. Just quickly now then, Assembly Member Curtin's going to ask some quick questions about fire safety and your work you've had to do on fire safety, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you. I just wondered, if you could tell me, how has fire safety measures and the removal of cladding affected your development plans and costs? If you've got anything you can say about that, and I'll start with you, David, from L&Q. Yeah.
I mentioned earlier that immediately after the Grenfell tragedy, we set aside £50 million for the removal and replacement of cladding. We're fitting sprinklers into our towers. We've undertaken level 4 intrusive assessments for all of our stock. And that, I must say, has generated a fairly significant programme of work, which we have now embarked on. The big challenge for us is just getting the people in to do the work. It's not the money, it's the people, because everybody is looking for people to undertake fireworks at the moment. So that's the biggest challenge for us. We're doing person-centred assessments now to make sure we know where our vulnerable residents are. We're prioritising sheltered stock and care homes. We're fitting property information boxes on all of our towers to ensure that we know, to ensure that the fire services know that what to expect when they enter the building. And we're working very closely with the fire brigade as well, and very productively as well. It hasn't affected our ambition when it comes to providing more homes and for a greater proportion of those homes to be genuinely affordable. But I think it has rebalanced our focus, and we're very conscious that that safety and quality are just as important as affordability and supply.
Okay, thank you. Can I move to you, Geeta, from Metropolitan?
Yes, I mean, we don't have a significant number of towers, but we have two where we're undertaking work, and the work comes to about 3 million in terms of that. But the bigger cost is, again, it's echoing really what David has said, is we've done a huge amount of work actually learning a lot from what we do in care and support, and in terms of good practice there, really understanding the residents and the assessments, etc. But it's, the more we do, the more it throws up, and the bigger the quality and quantity of work there is to carry out. And so we have a huge programme across our homes, which ranges from, fire doors to lighting to, sort of looking at compartmentalisation, etc. And so it's all of that which is really, absolutely sort of top priority in terms of what we're looking at, and that's why we're seeing the cost, particularly in terms of our ongoing budgets and what we expect to spend over the next few years, increase quite substantially. More than just the cladding on the block.
Thanks. Thank you. Yeah.
Very similar story. We've got 2 blocks which have got ACM cladding, and we are always ready to replace that, ready to go. It's obviously very disruptive for the residents, because literally have to take these panels off one by one, so it's going to be quite a long process for our residents. We'd actually started work before Grenfell, because what we were picking up was quite a lot of defects on a sort of generation of new build schemes that had come over. Nothing disastrous, but it was causing us concern. So we mobilised a team internally to start a programme of inspection and getting contractors back to fix those. And when we were doing that, we were finding quite a lot of issues in terms of compartmentalisation. And obviously when Grenfell happened, they just intensified our focus on that. So we have got an ongoing programme to deal with that. It's coming towards the end, I think we're glad to say, so Martin, coming towards the end. We have significantly increased our resources internally in terms of health and safety and fire assessment. And I think the big question that we asked ourselves in all of that was, why didn't we know? Why? Yes, that was the fault of the contractor. It was his responsibility to do the work properly. But why were we not sufficiently on top of it? And it's made us rethink the way that we're doing development, because as for David and Geeta, our priority is safety and quality, and so we have and continue to significantly increase the technical capabilities of our internal teams, because we no longer have confidence in main contractors to be able to manage the supply chain in a way that's going to ensure we get the right product at the end of it. So the impact on our development programme is that we're going about it a different way. We've got different people running it. We brought in a lot more people from a construction background overseeing all of that. We're still reasonably content. We're using different contracting methods, so we're using management contracting as well as more traditional main contracting. So a whole series of changes in the way that we do it, and that we're confident will result in very good quality in terms of the homes that we're currently developing.
Thanks. You said you nearly finished, so you're sort of on top of this. And I mean, do you have any sort of idea of a date when you will have dealt with all the cladding issues you have?
Well, the actual recladding is probably going to, on one of them, is probably going to take us through to the end of 2020. It could be as long as 18 months. 18 months to do it, because it is such a laborious process. Obviously, with residents and occupation, won't be like that for all of them, because we'll be doing it section by section around the estate. But it is a painfully long process.
Okay. Now, Helen from.
I mean, a lot of what I would say has already been said. We have a 22-storey tower block in Lambeth with fully clad in ACM cladding. We will start removing it next month. It's been a very complicated process to get to a position when we can start taking it off. We have various other buildings with which we have compartmentation issues that we are working on. The board proactively, in the days after the Grenfell fire, agreed we would retrofit sprinklers into all our buildings over 10 stories, and we are doing that. And we have pretty intensive contact with residents in those buildings which are worst affected, and it is very difficult because our tower, our ACM clad tower, is not rented homes only, it's rented homes and leasehold homes. So those people are unable to sell at the moment. That creates a significant difficulty for them, and we're working through it as quickly as we can, but it's slow.
So you're starting soon. Have you got any idea when you might finish?
The recladding programme is 110 weeks for this building.
Right, thank you. And if I could just go back to David from L&Q, you've got sort of more, £50 million you're putting in, which is quite a lot. So do you have any idea when you might finish any recladding issues you've got in your stock?
We have 12 blocks, and we should be complete by the end of this financial year. The only doubt I have is that two of my colleagues have said that it's going to take longer, but we're aiming to complete by the end of this financial year.
Is that because you're saying that that there's the same people and there's a competition for the labour in people doing it? So okay,
there's been a period of uncertainty when we didn't know what to use, and then we're all competing for the same labour.
I think there's also a wide variation in the complication of the building type. So our building is new; it's only 3 years old. The cladding is part of the rain screen. Taking it off creates all manner of technical difficulties. Some buildings are easier to get it off, some are more difficult.
Yeah,
basically.
so we were able to take ours off, but obviously we had to go through planning, etc. And there's various steps in order to get it going. So we're now cladding, so it's a different situation.
Okay, right. Thank you, everyone. Yeah.
Just to finish off that section, 2 very quick yes or no questions. I'm going to have to insist. Are you helping residents who might have fuel bill issues whilst they've got their insulation removed? And are you publishing fire risk assessments to your residents? Many people have asked us about that.
We're not publishing fire risk assessments currently, but we are preparing to start publishing them, and if people ask for them, we will give them.
Okay.
We will hand them out. We haven't put them up on the website in the way that I think is being suggested.
Recommended by the ICO.
Yeah, partly because at the moment the way that they're written is very technical, and we're translating, sometimes hundreds of actions of the kind, move the bicycle outside number 25, into a kind of more digestible form. What was the other one, sorry?
Are you offering help to residents who might have fuel bill problems while you've taken off their insulation?
We haven't got to that stage
Okay.
yet, but if that were the eventuality, then I imagine we would look at it.
Okay, yes or no is good, thank you.
Yes, if that's the case, if it's evident that it is going to increase fuel bills, I'm not sure it will.
I think there is evidence from some of the blocks where that's already happened. That they're obviously there's insulation.
Well, I'll take that away. I wasn't aware that was going to be an issue.
If it's simply a rain screen, then maybe not.
I don't believe it's going to be an issue, but if it is, then we'll definitely cover it. And no, we're looking at the publication of fire risk assessment, but that's a massively complicated issue. In principle, in favour of doing it, it's just how you do it and what level of detail you go into.
Yeah. I mean, I think those of us who are concerned about this issue, we've learned how to understand fire risk assessments by now. You could just publish them and we'd get it. I mean, they are reasonably understandable. I've seen a lot of them in the last year, and they're comprehensible. I don't think they would alarm residents as if they're too much. Geeta, yes or no on both of those, please?
We haven't been asked by residents in terms of anything in terms of the block that we're cladding. So if it was an issue, we would, but it doesn't seem to have been one. And no, we haven't as yet. Again, we're looking at it.
First time I've heard of the insulation thing as an issue, same as colleagues. We are sharing assessments on request, and we're planning to put them on our website. It's just a matter of doing it, finding the best way of doing it.
Thank you.
Ask a question quickly.
I want to ask one.
We're trying to move on to the next section for Mickey, but if you want to do that and then you take over straight away, that would be great. Yeah. Sorry. For Leonie, sorry.
It's on compartmentalisation, because some of you have mentioned it. And in a previous investigation of the Assembly, we found that leaseholders often were responsible for DIY improvements to their homes, which then led to breaking the firewall and actually made the building quite dangerous. And I just wonder whether you have any inspection system in terms of leaseholders, any of you?
We don't.
No.
We do of the common
You
parts.
mean of the internal...
Do you recognise it as an issue?
I mean, a leaseholder who's doing major work, if we're the freeholder, should request permission to do the work, and we would then check that it's being adequately done so that it doesn't breach the compartmentation. But if they don't, we're not individually inspecting every leasehold flat for signs of work having been done, and nor could we, I don't think.
Okay, well...
There's another issue about leaseholders, which is the question of whether their front doors are fire safe. And, in a way that's a more accessible one, because you can quite often see if the leaseholder's door is not to the required standard, and that's a live debate in our organisation what we're going to do about this. Are we going to try and force them to change the doors? Are we going to change them for them? What are we going to do?
Conversely, I've had the opposite point made to me by leaseholders that they've invested in a fire-safe door, but the local authority or housing association has then put a surround round it that is practically made out of balsa wood that is clearly not up to fire safety standards. So, you know, I think there's... The thing I actually wanted to ask is, two of you, I think David and Helen, said something about installing sprinklers. What you didn't say was, would you be recharging the leaseholders and the shared owners? You wouldn't be.
No.
I'm not even sure that's how you pronounce it. That's what I'm going to say. You know, but then it does take a lot of staff time and resources in terms of merging potentially very different organisations. So I'm not going to start with Helen because she's obviously made it pretty clear that that's not really something that Network has been on the page for. Do you not think in some ways that it can end up being a bit of a distraction? I mean, do you think looking at everything to do with Aldwick at the moment might be distracting from a glowing housing management and maintenance service?
No, not really. I mean, I think it depends. It can be, yes, if it's. I mean, I'm sure there are examples of mergers that, you know, don't have a great rationale to them. Certainly ours with Aldwick does, and we're going about it in a way which is designed to minimise distractions. So, in our case, for example, Aldwick will become a subsidiary of Catalyst on the 1st of April, and we will then gradually affect the merger, the integration of the two organisations. And that's really to address that point, that we are both very focused at the moment on improving customer service. We're very focused on our own programmes in terms of new homes. And what we don't want to do is to get everybody who's involved in those things suddenly focused on this. So we're going to go about it in a very gradual way, which will be designed to make sure that we both continue on. We've both got big reform programmes in terms of doing things better, doing more of them, doing it better, particularly for our customers. And we don't want those being interrupted by the merger.
Same, Geeta. Metropolitan, Thames Valley, how different are they? Bringing them together, isn't that a distraction?
Well, I think the rationale for us was really that the difference would add value. So Metropolitan has, you know, regeneration and care and support, which Thames Valley doesn't have. Thames Valley has sort of key worker housing, it has a digital platform that it's already developed which can be extended across a broader area, and you know, it has a sort of private rental arm, and those things take years to develop in organisations. You know, so somebody wants to go off and do something different, that investment actually takes a long time. So it was the difference in bringing it together to create something new and different, which was really the rationale, and around really driving some of the service improvements with different kind of skills and talents in the organisation. So, you know, ours was, yes, we're going to build more home, but the rationale was actually around creating a more service-orientated organisation, which is really about people. So, you know, that was the sort of basis of it, and through that also increasing the resilience and the number of homes that can be built. So, you know, we're about to go live. We've spent a year. It's been a huge amount of time, but actually both organisations through the year have still been focused on improving their performance, and, you know, making sure things don't get all absorbed into the new, but about keeping things going. So, you know, you have to just really focus and make sure you focus on the right things.
David, endless mergers. Not all of those organisations can be bringing in different things, surely.
No, of course not. And I mean, whilst we've done quite a few mergers in our time, we haven't done one for a while until East Thames came along. I think the others were in the early 90s from memory. But I think one of the big challenges for East Thames and L&Q was that we did the same things in the same place differently. And so we had different systems, different procedures, different people, different pay and reward systems. Everything was different, but we did the same thing in the same boroughs. And we had two of many things that we only needed one of. And so there was a degree of distraction. And what was important to us was that we got through it as quickly as possible, that we created one organisation as quickly as possible. And so, having been through a period of distraction, having seen that create some uncertainty amongst staff, having seen that uncertainty lead to an impact upon morale, having seen that impact upon morale affect service quality, you've just got to get through it as quickly as possible, which is exactly what we've done. So we are now, we've been for several months, one organisation, one set of systems, one leadership team, and so on. And as a consequence, we've seen a bounce in staff engagement, a bounce in resident satisfaction, and we're back in business. And we think that that temporary distraction was worth it, given that it's enabled us to commit to a programme of 100,000 homes.
But during the bromance, Hyde fell out of love and just sort of fell
It did,
out.
and it was the same thing really. We initially thought that our differences were, or that our similarities were greater than our differences. It wasn't the case, and we get on fine as members of G15. We're over it, and it was one that didn't work, and we went into it for the right reasons. We brought it to a halt for the right reasons.
Now, Rod talked about having one partner coming in as a subsidiary and then gradually moving into a full merger.
Yeah.
You've talked about trying to go through the process as quickly as possible. There are some housing groups that are sort of almost like a federated structure of different bodies all leading up to one board with lots of area boards, and there's a myriad different ways of doing it. About how long would you say that it normally, if there is a normally, takes to go through the process of completely merging two organisations? I'm going to stick with Geeta and David on this one, I think.
Yeah, I mean, we're going for the bringing it together and doing it in one way as quickly as possible, and we reckon it will take us 18 months to 2 years.
18 months, about the same?
It took us 15 months.
15 months. And so with the subsidiary?
We've assumed 2 years, that we would do it at most within 2 years. I think both sets of board members and staff, leadership teams want to do it in a shorter time, but we've allowed 2 years.
Yeah.
Okay, so you've just
moved to
mentioned
that bit within before the merger, so there's bits you can do quickly and other bits.
So you've just talked about board members and staff teams, and David was saying there's been a bounce in terms of enthusiasm from the staff. What about the residents? How have you involved them in the process of the new merger happening? I happen to have a few Optivo schemes around the corner from me, and they all seem to have fallen out of love with Optivo and keep still talking to me about Viridian and Servite, so you can tell where they came from. I'm not sure how much consultation went on with those residents, or indeed whether the consultation would have been meaningful with them about the reasons for doing the merger with Amicus Horizon or otherwise. How do you involve the person who is receiving your service in this kind of thing?
Well, in our case, I think in every case, we consult. We have a duty to consult. It was originally a regulatory obligation, but following recent changes to the way the regulation works, it is no longer. But nevertheless, we still consult. We want to know what our residents think, and we want to adapt our plans based upon what they think. We have 100 residents involved in our governance structure through 8 neighbourhood committees. We have each of the chairs reports to a residents' services group, the chair of whom sits on the board of L&Q, and so residents and their views are completely integrated into the way that we think and plan.
Good.
Yeah, I mean, we did a consultation exercise, and we agreed to visit any residents' associations that wanted us to visit them to discuss it. People are concerned about their tenancy, if they have a concern. Once that's known that there's not going to be any change, and there's not going to be any change in terms of their local arrangements, then it's really your question earlier, is it going to be a distraction from getting on with the main job? And, our response has been, there will be a time where we're bringing everything together, but the aim is to be a better service organisation at the end of that, and most people are happy with that because they've got to see it, don't they? They've got to see what happens as a result of it. So for us, it's really about making sure there's big differences locally in lots of different areas, and making sure we have those local arrangements, and we're discussing things locally around what's happening. The rest actually is a bit invisible to them.
Would you say then for the staff, moving back to the staff, that it provides more and better opportunities for them to take on new roles if people want to? You were talking about the different aspects of Metropolitan and Thames Valley being brought in. Does that give better opportunities for people to move from sort of one area of work to another, with training to help them move? And are you all playing, I presume, the London Living Wage? So I'm going to start with Rod about improved opportunities. Do you think Aldwick coming in is going to provide better opportunities?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, to be honest, I do think that the whole thing, skills and being able to attract and retain people and provide development opportunities for people, that's one of the key benefits of merger, particularly in an environment of skills shortage, which we have in London. So yeah, I mean, we will be... the HQ will be where Catalyst is in Ealing. The Aldwick office will be a regional HQ. We think it's going to provide loads of opportunities for existing staff in terms of bigger departments and also opportunities for people to work from different locations. So yeah, I mean, I think it's actually one of the most positive things about mergers, and certainly both sets of staff are very excited about it.
Same, Geeta.
Yeah, we've got a lot of excitement. We've got people who, we want to really bring on in the organisations who've kind of run out of rope really around what they were doing, and they see this as a massive opportunity for them to do more. It means we can really think about, the resilience question as well as staffing and how we really bring people on and how we resource that. So, there's been a big uplift in engagement as well. People are really engaged in the creating something new, and there's been a lot of positivity actually.
Helen, you?
Exactly the same. People are really excited about the prospect of building new towns, building 100,000 homes, financing development, improving our existing service, digitising elements of our service. There is just so much going on that has been enabled as a result of our bringing East Thames and L&Q together. I must say, it's a bit of a journey, and so you start off, people are really excited, and then you bring things together, and people have to change, and they don't necessarily like. None of us like changing very much, and so that will affect engagement, but then you come through that to the other side and people see the promises that you made at the beginning starting to take shape, and they get excited again.
Just to come back to the point about the London Living Wage, I assume the answer to that is yes. What about unions? Do you go through consultation processes with your in-house trade unions as well over... Because I can remember certainly when Almos were being set up, obviously most local authority housing departments, have good recognition arrangements. Is that part also of the process of consultation with staff?
We recognise Unison. And we consult.
Yeah, and MHT recognise Unison and Thames Valley Unite, and there's been full.
So you just consulted with both Unite and Unison?
For the last 4 years, we've had our own staff consultative committee, elected people from around the organisation, and they're the first people we talk to whenever there's any change proposed, and so they were the first people we talked to about before we announced the proposals regarding the merger. So it works. It's for us, it's a really important group of people who we work with on all of our change programmes.
I assume you recognise it, whether you're going through change processes or not.
We have a staff consultative committee.
Okay, so the same as Catalyst.
Same as Catalyst.
Now, unkind people often look at the overall package for outgoing chief executives, which is obviously sometimes quite large because it might include a final pension payment, and they say that a big merger is just about somebody receiving a large payoff. What's your view on that? And I'm going to start with Helen and then work that way down the queue. And it's something that is thrown a lot at housing associations about
I'm aware that's
mega salaries in general, and the average salary of the G15 chief executives, etc., etc.
I'm aware that people say that mergers are organised around the retirement plans of chief executives, and I imagine that sometimes there's an element of truth in that. The board has the responsibility for ensuring that whatever happens is in the best interests of both organisations and is not motivated by anybody's self-interest. In regard to the salaries of chief executives, we are completely transparent, as you know, about what we are all paid. You can look up my salary in Inside Housing at any time. I'm not complaining. Having said which, it's, you know, even in a smaller organisation, it's a very big, complicated and responsible job. And that's what's driving the pay rates. And again, the boards have a responsibility to make sure that what they're doing is reasonable and proportionate to the responsibilities of the people concerned. It's not so, you know, the chief executive is not setting their own pay rate. There are remuneration boards responsible for making sure that it's appropriate, fair, reasonable, proportionate.
Sorry, Roy, this might seem slightly personal.
No, I'm happy to answer it.
But,
I mean,
you know,
I'll be retaring before the merger takes place. I'll be retiring at Christmas. There's no payoff. I'm retiring on my pension. About 12 years ago, we started the process of ending our defined contribution, our defined benefit scheme. So I will be retiring with my accrued service up till then in terms of defined benefit. And everybody, including me, from 2006 onward, moved from that day on, moved over to defined contribution, all at the same contribution rate. And that will be my pension. So there is no payoff and no additional pension.
I wasn't paid to go. That would have been a bit odd, wouldn't it? So, you know, I got the job and I'm not retiring.
But in general, the general point about, you know, people pointing fingers at housing associations and saying, you know, they're not really interested in providing management and maintenance. All they're interested in doing is merging and becoming very large and then doing masses of spec development, and the standard of development isn't even that good anyway, which is a sort of a very unkind encapsulation of what some people say.
Yeah, I do realise people say that, and I think we are well paid. I feel very, very lucky that I do a job I love and I get well paid for it. And, you know, echo everything Helen said around, you know, remuneration committees, etc. And I think, you know, that has been the case in some instances because the data shows it for itself. So we can't, you know, we're not here to uphold everything that's happened in the sector, but you know, we know we're doing it for the right reasons, and our board is very much, you know, on top of that. So,
do you think there's sometimes a lack of understanding of the full breadth of activity of associations? I mean, certainly in local authorities, I've heard people at the top of some housing departments saying, well, they're just a sort of, you know, they're just the housing department, which, I mean, is probably not correct.
I think people forget about the large treasury. You know, the amount of borrowings we have, the scale and size of what we do, which is, you know, FTSE 250 companies equivalent, and the scale of and complexity of the development and the risk that's involved, as well as the sort of safeguarding and other things that happen if you've got care and support. So, you know, the complexity is there in terms of the organisation. I think the way the remuneration is benchmarked is, you know, it's a transparent operation, and I think, you know, the members of the boards take it very seriously in terms of what they're doing. So I think it is more complex than sometimes, and I understand why local authority housing directors feel that sometimes, because they feel they've got complex jobs as well, and chief execs, but you know, there is a huge complexity in juggling the sort of development side. And I think when we have board members come in, actually, they say, it's particularly if they come from the private sector, actually, they say these are the most complex positions they've ever held in terms of the range of and skills that are required in terms of what we do. So I think they are complex organisations, but we're lucky to have these jobs. So,
David, same question.
Well, I certainly agree we're lucky to have these jobs. I hope that over the last 2 hours we've gone some way to convince you that we're not in this just to make a load of money and to get a payoff. I hope you recognise that there is a genuine commitment to social purpose along this side of the table and amongst our colleagues. In the case, I mean, just taking L&Q and East Thames as an example, when we brought two organisations together, we had two chief executives and we only needed one. We had two executive teams, we only needed one. We had two finance departments, we only needed one. And so you have two of a lot of things that you only need one of. And the deal is that you go from two to one, you release some value, and you invest that value into more affordable housing. And so, yes, we did pay off the chief executive of East Thames and their executive team. That was part of the deal. We paid them their contractual entitlement. We sought legal advice. We declared it to the regulator to make sure that they were fine with it. And in my opinion, it was the right thing to do because we created a more efficient organisation that could deliver more for our social purpose.
Thank you. That was everything I wanted to ask about. And can I just say, I thought the recent announcement about L&Q and tenancies was extremely welcome. Thank you.
Right, so we are now
Can we go on just quickly?
9 minutes left, and we need to cover the topic of accountability. However, I should say we have done an investigation as the Housing Committee into tenant and resident engagement, which covers councils and housing associations. We have put points raised by residents to different housing associations for this, as well as councils, and we have a report in the offing on that topic. So just to apologise for not having much time to cover this here, but we have looked in some detail at resident engagement, tenants and resident associations, that kind of thing. We do have some important questions.
Tenants.
With a whole room full of residents who are able to give their views. But we do have some questions about accountability to residents, but also to us, that Tom is going to answer.
I just want to try and real quickly, sorry, on the union point, you talked about workers' consultative committee. I don't think that's not quite the same. I don't think that gives workers the same level of representation as a trade union. And we were contacted by someone who said that would they say that they said Catalyst had de-recognised a trade union?
That's right.
Is that true? Do you think that goes against sort of the social principles that you're sort of meant to uphold?
Absolutely not, no. I think the fundamental issue is that what we believe in is that we should be listening to our staff and working with our staff and engaging our staff in what we do. What we found, bluntly, was that's not what Unite were delivering. They had something like 10% membership. And my pushback to them would be they need to look in the mirror to see why that was the case, given that we were an organisation that was encouraging union membership. What we have found through setting up our own forum is that we have now got a much better direct dialogue with our staff through that group, and so I actually think the opposite, that actually it's far more effective. It gives our staff a far more effective voice than was the case previously. People are still perfectly entitled, of course, to call upon their union where they need it in terms of support in whatever circumstance.
Is the representation committee democratically?
Yes, it's elected. These are people who are elected around the organisation. We don't have any part in choosing people. It's all democratic, and so from our point of view, this is something where there's a greater staff voice and there's greater staff engagement.
I wouldn't accept that from a private company, and equally wouldn't accept it from a charity really. But I guess I don't know why you wouldn't go to another union or do something to increase the membership. It's anyway. We have to move on. So yes, I mean the lead-up question is, how accountable are you to residents, and how are you accountable to your residents? I guess as well would be a good addition to that. So we'll start with David this time.
I touched on this earlier before. We got 100 residents involved in the governance of the organisation through 8 neighbourhood committees, entirely resident-based, and who sits on those committees is the residents' choice, not ours. The chair of each of those committees sit on a resident board. The chair of that board sits on the group board of L&Q, so sits on the board of a £28 million organisation. And we really value the involvement of residents. It's not the only way that we involve them, but we find that if you invest in residents, if you build their confidence and trust, then they will be your advocates. And so it's a really important part of our governance.
I'm going to move on. I've got some supplementaries. I'm going to move on pretty quickly on the first.
Yeah, so we have a resident on our board
They chair the Resident Services Committee. The Resident Services Committee's got 6 residents on it. We have a national customer group that has input from a whole host of residents' associations that work across the organisation, and we have a service scrutiny group as well that goes in and looks at picks and chooses their own services to go in and audit. That reports through. So we have a whole load of formal structures and informal structures as well. We also look at sort of co-design of services with our customers, so that doesn't involve any involved people. It's really around how can we really improve the experience for the customer, and looking at sort of different pinch points and using that sort of service design principle to just change and alter how we do things.
What?
Almost identical answer. So we've got a resident on our board. We have a customer experience committee, half of the members of which are residents.
Is a resident elected by the residents?
No.
Is that the same for you, Geeta?
No, it's not. We have moved to a position where we encourage residents to apply to be on the board. So the resident who's on the board is there in their own right, on their own merits as a board member. We personally think that's a better way.
And the board chooses to co-opt the tenant. Is that how?
Not co-opted. No, they apply for membership, and we encourage and support residents to seek board membership. And so the tenant, in fact, the leaseholder in this case, who's on the board, is there in their own right as a board member. So they're not there as the resident board member. They're there as a board member, as I said, on their own merits and in their own right, on a par with the other members of the board.
So just to challenge you on that, some people might say, well, you're not going to pick someone that's going to, I suppose, I don't want to use the term rock the boat. I don't think that's necessarily the right term, but I think you might choose someone safe. Would that be a fair?
No, not really,
assessment?
because I wouldn't say any of our board members are safe. I mean, we want a board that's going to challenge us. That's what we want, and we want people who are going to, what are they there to do? They're there to critique what myself and the rest of the team are doing. They're there to offer different ideas. They're there to challenge, and that's what we're looking for from all board members. So, no, I don't see it that way.
There's only one representative, and it's a leaseholder. Who represents the social rented tenants?
Well, it's not. The leaseholder including residents being involved in all sorts of, as Geeta was saying, things like we've just relet our maintenance contracts. Massive decision, huge implications for our customers, and there's been a whole process of involving our residents in the selection of those new contractors, and a whole sort of series of engagement events to do. And that's typical of what we do across the piece when we're doing anything major.
Helen?
Yeah, well, we are different. We don't have a resident on our main board. We have local panels in each of our 3 main regions, and they are part of our Customer Services Committee, which reports to and has things delegated to it from the main board. We have all the range of customer involvement mechanisms that colleagues have already described, including sitting on procurement panels, including sitting on, when you come to the actual accountability aspect of it, sitting on our final stage complaint panels, so that if we have a resident who's brought a complaint against the organisation that we have been unable to resolve, a panel will hear it, consisting of a board member, a resident and a member of the executive. We have many different mechanisms for measuring satisfaction, which I think is part of accountability. So, for example, monthly surveys of satisfaction with repairs, monthly surveys on satisfaction with antisocial behaviour, all of this kind of thing. We include residents on all our major procurement panels at the point of decision, as well as in determining what it is that we're going to procure. We are unusual amongst housing associations in that we have a fully functioning TMO on our regeneration estate in Lambeth, which has a board with resident members.
Did you inherit that? Was it a stock transfer?
No, we didn't. Well, yes and no is the answer to that. It was a TMO There was a stop transfer, it became a subsidiary housing association. We then amalgamated all the housing associations into a single organisation of work homes, and we set up a TMO in order to continue the local management that was historic, very embedded in that estate.
I'll move on, because I'll move us on to I just would like to sort of your views on some of the proposed regulatory changes in the Social Housing Green Paper, and particularly this idea of introducing league tables with housing association services and performance. Good idea, bad idea? Will it help? Will it improve things?
I think that the suggestion of having a set of comparable metrics is one that, I'm reasonably positive about. I think we all have this information and we can all publish it. I think the difficulty that we might have with it is where is the comparability? How, closely aligned are the data sets? Are people measuring the same things? I think in terms of providing accountability for housing associations, it's quite a crude measure, though. Whether it's a league table or whether it's just a comparison of KPIs, and it massively begs the question of, if your provider is an outlier in some way or other, whether very good or very bad, what happens?
Well, I suppose your residents can't just decide, well, I'm going to switch from that housing association.
No, they can't, and that's why there is, in my view, there is a particular responsibility on housing association boards and executives to make sure that we are listening and responding to and providing the services that we should be providing to residents, because they can't just switch providers. Having said which, some can switch providers. If you are a fully leasehold block, you can exercise the right to manage in a housing association context. And we have had occasions where that's happened, generally very small buildings. Whether that ought to be extended to residents, there's all manner of sort of complications attached to that, I think. But there definitely does need to be accountability to residents for the services that we're providing. And I think we all try. We try to be open, we try to be transparent, and we try to be kind of self-critical where we get it wrong. We do get a lot of criticism, a lot of it around maintenance, and we're working to improve our services constantly, and we're just open to ideas that would make that would create the sort of sense of trust that we need to have really good, positive relationships with residents and stakeholders.
Whether it's a good idea or not, I think it's going to happen. So I think we're going to have to live with league table. I think the key thing is about providing information, and I think we already subscribe to something called the sector scorecard, which is providing comparable information across, so we can benchmark. I'm very, very relaxed and happy about expanding that. I think the issue, as ever, is coming up with things where you're comparing apples with apples, and I think that's the risk with league tables, is you can jump to conclusions. I mean, just one example: is spending more on maintenance per unit, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Does it mean
is
you're
it
inefficient,
or are you actually more investing more? So it is dangerous too.
I suppose looking at resident satisfaction might be the better way of making that assessment. Geeta, sorry, we do need to pick up. The chair
I
is.
Agree with that. All of that. And it's if you want to drive your performance and your service, you've got to want to. And you can make up. You can do everything you want in terms of it's about commitment and purpose. And I think that's the most important thing.
David,
I would agree. I'm, like colleagues, relaxed about the introduction of league tables. What matters most, I think, is culture. It's about the quality of an organisation and its commitment to service.
It's been put to me by people who've worked in the sector that actually the Audit Commission used to do quite a good job of holding associations' feet to the fire, but I don't think we've got time to get into into that now, whether or not. Chair, do you want me to move on? Have we run out of time, or do you want me to move on to the next?
We're way over time.
We're way over time.
So the next section, I was going to say we're going to have to come back to it. I will explain that we're going to look at welfare reform in more detail in a second. I've one question we have to ask, I think. In terms of data and KPIs and all of those things you're talking about, ways of finding out what's happening, we have an issue in that we have a remit to look at resident welfare and things in Greater London, and quite a lot of your organisations now spill over and cover. You're so big that we would struggle to find out what you were spending on maintenance in London, how many homes you had in London, even from your published financial and accountability information. Is there a way of getting maybe on an annual basis a London report from housing associations? Obviously you can't promise us that on behalf of the whole of the G15, but it would be a very helpful thing for us to be able to get.
I'm happy to agree
Just
to that.
geographically constrained.
Sure,
you must
okay.
know where your homes are.
Yeah.
G15 would be
Yeah.
happy to commit,
Yeah.
but we can't kind of commit on behalf of people who are not members of G15.
No.
We can cut our data whichever way you want to. So.
I would have thought that would be simple, but it would also be really useful for us to be able to see, because you are so much the game in town now. Okay, well, thank you very much. We have many more questions we could have asked you. And there are, we're very interested to know your reaction to the changes that have been made recently to government policy, to new funding that was announced, and those were things that we wanted to ask you about. We also wanted to ask about the effects of welfare reform, but actually as a committee, we've resolved to look at this issue at the end of this year anyway, so I'm sure we will have housing association representation when we look at that. In addition, as I mentioned earlier, look out for our report soon on resident engagement, because we will have recommendations. And the Environment Committee in its December meeting is going to be looking at fuel poverty, cold and damp, and some issues to do with the fire safety changes in homes there. So the Assembly as a whole is working on many more issues than we've managed to cover. I'd just like to thank all of you for coming, for your frankness and your willingness to listen to tough questions, particularly about your own salaries. We have a couple of business items on the agenda now, which we'll just run through very, very quickly. Can I ask the committee to note the report and the discussion we've had today, and agree to delegate authority to meet as chair in consultation with party group lead members to agree any output from this discussion, including any follow-up questions we might send to
Agreed.
housing associations. Our work programme is item 6. Can you note the work programme and identify any additional issues you might want to consider at future meetings? The next meeting is on the 28th of November, and there we will be getting an update from the Mayor's housing team on their delivery of affordable housing. Thank you.
Thank you.